you tell your family that you don't want to be Mormon anymore, or you're choosing to leave, or you're questioning, or whatever it is, how do you do that, and why is that so hard? Well, that's what I want to talk about today, because it's one of the hardest things of this process, if not the hardest thing. Not only telling them, but dealing with the consequences after, right? So I want to talk about that. And I think it's really interesting that a lot of the coming out language applies perfectly here, right? And that's why I say, like, how do you come out as non-Mormon? How do you work through that process? How do you deal with the consequences that are gonna come? How do you prep yourself for that? All of that, that all applies perfectly. And I wish that it didn't. I wish that all coming out processes were so much easier and you weren't met with this much negativity, but you are. And that's one thing that I don't like to sugarcoat anything, but especially not this, because if we pretend that, oh, they're probably gonna be okay, like when I tell my family, they're probably gonna be okay with it, and we try to talk ourselves into that being true, I hope that it is, but in my experience with talking to most people about this, that's not gonna happen. So I think preparing for the reality of what could happen and how that could look is really, really important. So that would be kind of my tips on doing this, would be only tell them when you're ready to deal with the consequences that are gonna come. So only tell them when you feel really strongly that you can hold your own in that, and also get support for yourself in this, because it's gonna be really, really tough. And then also work through how you're gonna cope and deal with that negativity. So I feel like I did a lot of things poorly when coming out of the Mormon church. But the one thing that I do feel like I did well was I waited to tell my parents until I was ready to hold that. Because I knew that I was gonna get met with so much crap. And I knew if I wasn't strong that could make the process longer, and it could sway me, and I could get pulled back in, and I knew that would just be a nightmare. So I waited a long time to tell them. Really, a really long time, until essentially they kind of knew, and you know, there was a lot of things bad about that whole process too, for sure. But I waited until I was ready to kind of deal with that, because by the time I told them, I was so secure in myself and what I wanted and who I was, at least in this sense, that all of their stuff didn't faze me as much as it would. It still was awful. I got voicemails of my grandma crying over and over again about how she couldn't believe I was leaving her and the family for eternity, and that I would just turn my back on the family for eternity. And when your 80-year-old, at that time 80, she's 90 now, your 80-year-old grandma is crying on your voicemail, it's terrible, right? It's so heart-wrenching. And I knew that was the kind of stuff that would make me want to, like, at least pretend to conform and jump back into that and not hold my ground, because that's something that could at least make me pretend for longer, because I feel so bad about that. But since I waited so long, I was ready for that kind of stuff, relatively. In my experience with this, and in talking to my clients and talking them through this, it seems to always be worse than you think, at least in different ways. Like, you can anticipate it being bad in some ways, but then something will hit you and it will just be like, oh man, I did not see that coming, and that's terrible. And hopefully it's also better in some ways too, so it kind of can balance out a little bit, but it definitely, there's always those curveballs that are really, really tough. Yeah, there always is, for sure. But the family is going to react likely like they are losing you for eternity. And when we look at that, that is so heavy. So of course they're gonna have these huge reactions, and they're gonna try to get you back, because they think that trying to get you back is saving you, right? They're trying to save your soul. And if they love you, they're going to try to do that in an extreme way, because they want you to be saved. So I try to understand that and understand their perspective and talk myself down from their reactions. And it helps some, but I still feel very angry about it, because you're now in this weird position where you can understand how they think, but they can't understand how you think, which is really frustrating sometimes. And I definitely find myself frustrated about this, because I feel like in this way, and just as a therapist, I feel like I can step into other people's shoes fairly well and understand them, and try to really, at least from as much as I can, understand how they're feeling and what they're thinking and empathize with that. But they're not good at doing that back in any way in this circumstance. They cannot understand anything that you feel or think, and anything that you say or try to say will be met with a lot of crap. Yeah, it's really tough. So prepare, you gotta prepare for it, and make sure you're ready for it, and ready for some possible really hard consequences, and that you have people that you can talk to help get you through it, because otherwise it's such an awful process. I've had clients who were really considering killing themselves instead of coming out in this way. So if that is happening, you can see that that's obviously an awful process. I feel like that happens a lot too when there is kind of other things to disclose, like I'm gay and I'm leaving the church, right? Or I'm getting a divorce and I'm leaving the church. That just like adds layers onto the stuff that you have to deal with, and the reactions that you have to deal with from other people. And it's so tough, especially in the beginning when you're still solidifying who you are and all of that. And I think that after you leave, that's one of the hard parts too, is your roadmap has kind of been taken away, and so you have to reestablish yourself and rebuild yourself and who you are, and find all that stuff again, which I want to talk about in the future too, how to do that, because I think that's really hard and something that needs to be talked about more. But for this one, I would just say really prepare for it, because some of the reactions that you get are so hard, and you can't change that. Really, you can do your best to prep for those conversations and prepare, which I definitely could have done better as well in doing that. I'm a lot better now because I've learned so much in helping people work through that and figure out how to talk to their family and the best way to talk to them, and when to tell them, and how to tell them, all that stuff. I'm way better at that now. But when you don't know what you're doing, it can just it can make it worse. Sometimes that initial process can make it worse in the way you disclose, but again, that's not your fault. You're trying to have them accept in the best way that you can, and share it in the best way you can, and that's great if you can do that. That can help, but you can't change their reactions. And even when we do all the prepping in the world, it still is hard, and it still goes poorly a lot of times, because they don't know how to react, and that's all their stuff. They don't know what to do. And I think the reason that it's so hard for us to talk about it and to share these things initially with our family is we know how hard it's gonna be, and we know the devastation that they're gonna be feeling, and we know how heavy their reactions are going to be, and it's really tough. You know, I've had clients who are like, I'm never gonna tell them, I'm not gonna tell them, I'm just gonna keep living this double life. And I did that too for a long time. But eventually it comes to a point, especially when you're more secure in yourself, that you're like, you know what, no, like I need to be genuine with who I am, and I need to do this and talk to you. And everyone's families have different reactions. Unfortunately, I've had a couple people this year whose families have essentially disowned them in different ways after they told them, you know, either telling them not to come to family events, or telling them they didn't want them around for a while, or just completely cutting off contact. I mean, those kind of things, those are awful and heavy. And I think they're even heavier when you are raised in a church that values family so much, and you're taught for so long that that's so important. I think that's the conflict that comes up for a lot of people, because a lot of us, myself included, believe that. We believe part of that, and we take that, and I've taken that still. I believe in family and in community and in coming together and supporting each other. That's one value that I've taken with me. So it's really hard when you've been taught that your whole life, and then you decide to be true to who you are and tell your family about it, and you get disowned or you get kicked out or things change, right? Because then like the holidays come around and you're used to spending the holidays with your family every year, and it's such an important part of everything, and now you're not invited to come. That's happened to some of my clients, and that's so terrible because it's opposite to everything they've been taught their whole life, and they really value family, right? I've had the same experiences happen with clients who are gay and are struggling with that, and they're conflicted because they've been taught that a family and a relationship is only a heterosexual family and relationship, right? So they think that they can't act on any of those feelings, one, because the church tells them that they can't, but also because they don't know how that works with family, or they don't see that. They see those as conflicting often in the beginning, right? They don't see that, oh, I can be gay and still have a family, right? That's seen as two different things. But I see that as a conflict that comes up often as well. Because if you do value family and you believe in that, when you step away from the Mormon church, you have to rework how that fits now in your life. Is that something you really want? And how do you want it to look? And all of that stuff. You have to rework all of that. And that's really, really hard, but also possible. And I think that's an important thing that we'll get to in other videos, is clarifying our values and fitting them in and building them into our life now and our new life now, and what that looks like now. And that's so possible. But it's something that you have to work through, and it's definitely not easy. So I'm interested to hear what you guys think. I'd be interested in some of your coming out stories in any sense of the phrase. How did it go? How have you worked through it? If it was easy or if it was hard, if it was difficult, how did you work through that? How is it now? Has it got better over time? For me, it has gotten a lot better over time, but there's still some things that come up. So how was it for you guys who have already done this? And for you guys who are thinking about it, what are your questions? What are your fears? How can we help you? All of that stuff, because we have this cool community, I think, that we can support each other and help each other through this, and kind of support each other along the way. So if you have any comments or questions, please share them, and let's talk about it.